Hello everyone, you're watching Ukraine Breaking News. My name is Maria Kahal and today we're talking to Mykola Murskyi, who is Director of Advocacy in Razom for Ukraine. Hello. It's nice to see you here.
Good to be here.
And first of all, I wanted to ask about this organization, how it was created and what you're doing now, and from what you began and how this organization developed.
So Razom began as one of the Maidan organizations that was founded in 2013, 2014 in the United States. So when the Revolution of Dignity was happening here in Kyiv and all over Ukraine, a number of organizations in the U.S. sprang up to do everything they could to support that movement. And Razom was one of those organizations. From 2014 through 2022, we were exclusively volunteer-based. We had a number of cultural exchange programs. We were kind of like a civil society bridge between civil society organizations here in Ukraine and then those that are based in the United States. In 2022, when the full-scale invasion began, and even really in the months leading up to it, we realized that our work needed to scale up significantly. And so we launched 5 emergency response programs to respond. The first was Razom Heroes. This is a program that's based here in Ukraine. Razom Heroes provides medical supplies to Ukrainian medics on the front lines and other equipment that they need. Razom Health partners with Ukrainian hospitals and provides them supplies, materials. We have a network of psychological clinics all across Ukraine under the name Razom z Tobою that operate under Razom Health as well. And then we have a Razom Relief Program, which is the venue through which we provide grants to local organizations here in Ukraine that we want to support, that are doing incredible work and that we want to channel support to. And then we have 2 programs that are based in the United States. One is Razom Connect, which builds that cultural connection with Ukraine. So I'm sure many of your viewers will remember that in December of 2022 in Carnegie Hall, in New York, one of the most famous performing arts venues in the United States, there was a performance of the Ukrainian children's choir called Shtedrik. And that's a Razom Connect project. We helped to organize that. It was actually for the 100th anniversary of the premiere of the Leontovich arrangement of Shtedrik, the premiere of that in Ukraine, which was in Carnegie Hall, performed by the Koshitz Choir. And then last, of course, we have the Razom Advocacy Program, which I lead. This program is based out of the Razom office in Washington, D.C., and we have, our mandate is to make sure that U.S. support for Ukraine, that means military support, humanitarian support, financial support, political support around the world, not only stays the same, but actually increases. And for us to achieve this mission within our advocacy program, we have two main channels of work. The first is government affairs. And we have a team that works specifically on this kind of like direct advocacy on Capitol Hill and with the executive branch. So they are walking the halls of Congress constantly. I think they had 25 meetings last week just in Congress. And same thing with the executive branch, working with the Department of State, Department of Treasury, with the White House directly to make sure that they are maximally supportive. And then we have a public engagement team, which works with basically everybody else. So they work with the American public, with media in Ukraine. They work with other organizations that have an advocacy voice, like chambers of commerce, labor unions, and other ethnic diaspora organizations.
And how exactly do you work with politicians? What exactly you're doing? What projects, maybe? How you speak to them?
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting, and I am kind of a nerd when it comes to civic engagement and the American constitutional system, so I get very excited about this stuff. Our members of Congress are extremely responsive to their constituent voices. There are certain members of Congress who are in the process right now of winning or losing their elections by 1,000 or 2,000 votes. And that's not a very significant number, considering that, for example, in my congressional district, my congresswoman is Haley Stevens in Michigan. And our congressional district is about 10,000 people of Ukrainian descent, and probably more now since 2022. So Ukrainians have a significant, Ukrainian Americans and allies of Ukraine, generally speaking, have a significant opportunity to actually affect what politicians think on Ukraine, because they win their elections by these small margins. And I find it very cool that in the United States, you do not need an appointment to go into Congress. So in the congressional office buildings, there's 3 on the House side and 3 on the Senate side, because our Congress has 2 chambers, the House and the Senate. You do not need an appointment to go see your congressional representatives in Congress. You go through security, which you don't need an appointment for. You just walk in, and you look up exactly where your member of Congress's office is. I think my congresswoman sits in the Rayburn building. And you knock on the door and you say, "Hi, I live in your district. Here's my zip code, your postal code to prove that you live in the district." And they say, "Oh my gosh, welcome to Washington. We're so glad that you're here. What can we do to help you?" And then you say, "I want to talk to somebody who works in this office about Ukraine." And they will bring out a staffer, an advisor to the member of Congress who works on Ukraine issues. And you can talk to them for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes and say, I think it's extremely important that we do everything we can to support Ukraine. You can also engage with them by phone. You can write them letters. You can invite them to your local events. And it's an extremely effective way of demonstrating to them. This kind of personal engagement is an extremely effective way of demonstrating how much support there is for Ukraine in those districts.
It's very interesting because I always heard such things from Americans that Ukrainian Americans should go to their representatives and everything and just talk to them constantly. And I was like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Like in Ukraine, it's really impossible to just go and see your politicians from your district.
Yeah.
So it's really a cool system. And also I wanted to ask how you work with Americans, with just ordinary people from America. How you convince them that it's important for the United States to spend their taxes on Ukraine aid?
So the vast majority of Americans believe that Ukraine should win, and they believe that it is in the national interest of the United States for Ukraine to win. And although that number decreased slightly from February 2022 through the rest of 2022, for the last year and 8 months, that number has been stable. So that's extremely important for us to know, that the number of Americans, whether we're talking about MAGA Republicans, non-MAGA Republicans, or Democrats, who think that it's important for the United States that Ukraine win, that number has not changed in the past year and a half. And so we have a significant amount of people out there who already emotionally want to be on our side. So among that group, there are some people who are skeptical of whether American aid to Ukraine can actually make a difference and whether we ought to be spending that money to put in that effort, right? And so the arguments that we make to those people who want Ukraine to win but are skeptical that U.S. aid can make a difference address specifically that argument. So we demonstrate to them the successes that American aid, whether it's on the military front or financial aid or humanitarian aid, we demonstrate to them the difference that U.S. aid has made in the past. And there's plenty of examples of this. There's plenty of examples, particularly on the front lines, right? We've seen in the summer of 2022, for example, we saw fantastic success of the HIMARS system. And so we were able to go to members of Congress and demonstrate and say, look, you want Ukraine to win, but you don't know if the U.S. can actually help, if the U.S. can make a difference. Take a look. The U.S. has already made a significant difference by providing this system. And once F-16s are used more significantly in combat, we'll be able to defend Ukrainian skies. We'll be able to make those arguments as well. That, look, we were able to make a significant difference. So that's the category of people who want Ukraine to win, but don't think that U.S. assistance is particularly meaningful or effective. And they question why we should be doing it. They question whether we should be doing it for that reason. Now, for the segment of the population that is skeptical that Ukrainian victory is even a good thing or even a desirable outcome, we make 2 kinds of arguments. One, that it is in the interest of the United States for Ukraine to win, and I can speak to that in greater detail. And 2, that it is the morally correct thing to do. It is what justice requires, and if the United States wants to be that shining beacon on a hill that defends justice and freedom and liberty around the world, that helping Ukraine defend itself from the Russian invasion is the right thing to do. So for that category of people, for that segment of the population, those are the 2 categories of arguments that we make. But
yeah, it's a good point, but how do you convince people that it's it's morally a good thing to do and everything, but if they have their own problems within their own country, and how to convince them that it's important for them, that it's important for America. You said that it's another point that it's important for America and useful for America to victory of Ukraine. Why is that?
I mean, there's a number of specific examples that we can give that tie what we call in the United States kitchen table issues, so domestic, social, and economic issues that families that are struggling talk about at the kitchen table, so kitchen table issues. We can tie them specifically to what's going on in Ukraine. So now I'm just talking about interest arguments. And I don't want your viewers to think that those are the only kinds of arguments that we make. We are not arguing that the U.S. should help Ukraine simply because it's in the U.S. interest, right? It is the right thing to do. It is what justice requires. It is what morality requires. But when we are talking about these kinds of interest-based arguments, in the summer of 2022 in the United States, there was a massive shortage of baby formula, of infant formula. And it was very underreported, but a part of that reason why we had a huge surge in prices of infant formula and why there wasn't enough on shelves in stores is because some of the fatty acids that are used as a component of it come from sunflower seed oil. And Ukraine is one of the largest, if not the largest, exporter of sunflower seed oil in the world. And so we were able to tie to, whether it's congressional offices or to the public, we were able to tie something that they were seeing directly on American shelves to what Russia was doing to Ukraine. And certainly we can make these kinds of arguments with other exports that Ukraine has, whether we're talking about grain or graphite or anything else that Ukraine exports and helps the world economy continue to move. In terms of justice and morality-based arguments, Americans see themselves as they want to believe that the United States, and they do believe that the United States is one of the foremost forces for good around the world. And I believe that personally. And when they see what Russia is doing to Ukrainian civilians, to Ukrainian children, when they see the destruction of Ukrainian cities, the particular targeting of basically every religious group except Russian Orthodox people in the temporarily occupied territories, they realize that the stories that they are hearing in the Russian disinformation space are not true. And so we demonstrate to them exactly what's going on there. We demonstrate to them that, Protestant church after Protestant church are being closed. Protestant pastors, in particular, I'm segmenting this part of the population because these kinds of arguments are particularly effective with American evangelicals. When they see that Ukrainian evangelical Protestants are being persecuted by the Russian occupying forces, they realize that, oh my goodness, Putin is not the bastion and defender of conservative values that he presents himself to be.
And also I wanted to ask, what is the difference between advocating for Ukraine in Democrats and Republicans amongst them? What is the difference between these two, working with these two types of people and politicians?
I was expecting this question, and I was trying to think of a good answer, and I don't have one. I think that it's actually more similar than different. Both are interested in the two kinds of arguments, interest-based and ethics, morality-based arguments. On the Republican side of the aisle, under the Biden administration, the political question to them was more significant. So right now, I'm talking specifically about members of Congress on the Republican side of the aisle. And I can speak to the Republican electorate as well. But when we're talking about members of Congress, if they were getting political pressure from their voters and from their constituents, like we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, that the United States should not support Ukraine, should not continue to provide aid to Ukraine, even if they believed that we ought to, they often opposed aid to Ukraine. And there are a number of members of Congress that we have talked to, that I have talked to personally, that are supportive of aid to Ukraine personally, but because of the phone calls and letters and protests outside their offices that they get from people who are opposed to aid to Ukraine, they voted no. So a couple things from this. One, this demonstrates that advocacy is effective, because it can take a member of Congress who actually wants to help Ukraine and turn them into somebody who votes no on Ukraine aid. So advocacy works. And two, these members of Congress come to us and say, Mykola, we've been working with you for 2 years now. Please, generate some pro-Ukraine phone calls to my office. I want my staff to be getting pro-Ukraine letters and phone calls and emails and protests and meetings, because then I have the political cover that I need to be able to vote yes. So they actually, it's fascinating, they actually ask us to generate, to be able to work with their constituents, to activate their constituents, to mobilize them, so that way they get at least an equal amount of pro-Ukraine phone calls as they get anti-Ukraine phone calls. And this also demonstrates that advocacy works. Yeah.
Do they get a lot of anti-Ukrainian calls and protests?
Some offices do and some offices don't. So there's one in my state in particular that gets, for every one pro-Ukraine phone call, they get 30 anti-Ukraine phone calls. 30. And this office, the congressman himself, is extremely supportive of Ukraine. He's got a Ukrainian flag in his office. He's got lots of Ukrainians and Lithuanians,
We're talking
Latvians,
about Republican.
He's a Republican, yeah. And yet this member voted no because of the pressure that he got from the anti-Ukrainian phone calls. And it's on us. It is our responsibility. If your viewers have friends or family or enemies that are in the United States, I don't care if it's your second cousin, call them. Have them make sure that they are calling their congressman at minimum once a week. So everybody who lives in the United States, whether you are a citizen or not a citizen, you have one member of the House of Representatives, and you have 2 senators. And these 3 members of Congress are the ones who represent you in the United States legislature. You got to be calling them once a week. And what you do is you say, my name is Mykola Murskyi. My zip code, my postal code is 48085. You give them your postal code so that way they verify that you live in their congressional district. And then you say, I absolutely demand that you do more to help Ukraine. Thank you very much. Have a good day. That's it. You just leave a quick voicemail, and you do that once a week. You should write letters. You should invite them to community events. So the Ukrainian community in the United States tends to be centered around religious institutions. So you can tell how big a Ukrainian community is in a specific city by how many churches there are. So for example, in Chicago, there's something like 25 Ukrainian churches. In Detroit, we probably have about 10. So Chicago is like much bigger than we are in terms of how many Ukrainians there are. Invite the member of Congress to your church. They're home on the weekends. They fly home from Washington on the weekends. We should have members of Congress coming to our church for coffee. In Ukrainian churches in the United States, we have people gather in the basement of the church or in the hall of the church for coffee afterwards, coffee and snacks. Invite the member of Congress to come and speak to the community. There should be members of Congress there at least once a month. We need to activate ourselves. We need to mobilize ourselves. And if we don't develop that political muscle, we are not going to have the effect that we need to have on Washington.
Okay, and how do you work with people who are anti-Ukrainian, like with this audience, or you don't?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. You have to. So not only is it possible, it's absolutely required. So I think that especially now, as we head into a second Trump administration, it is crucial that we talk to people who don't agree with us. The more they disagree with us, the more we need to go talk to them.
Do you think this works?
So there's a couple things. One, it doesn't matter. We have a responsibility and we have a duty, and we have to execute it. 2, it might not be possible for us to turn them into a yes vote and to be a supporter, but they will at least understand that 1, there's significant pressure within their district to be pro-Ukrainian, and 2, that it's in the interest of the United States, or that there's good arguments why it's in the interest of the U.S. to be pro-Ukrainian, and they will be a quieter opponent. So instead of being an active opponent who is doing everything they can to stop aid to Ukraine, they will become a passive opponent of aid to Ukraine. So rather than actually trying to stop aid to Ukraine, they will, they'll be quiet, they're not going to say anything, they'll vote no, but they're not going to be going around trying to block it and to stop it.
And did it become more difficult to advocate for Ukraine after Hamas invasion to Israel? Because a lot of people started to, go on on pro-Israel protests, anti-Israel protests, pro-Palestinian protests, and a lot of aid from the United States goes to Israel. So did it become more difficult?
I don't think so. I think that there's a portion of the American electorate who does not think that the U.S. should be generally involved in global affairs. And on the right side of the aisle, so the Republican side of the aisle that thinks this, they all of a sudden realized that we do need to have a voice in what's happening around the world. So the war between Israel and Hamas demonstrated to them that we can't entirely retreat from what's happening around the world.
And what do you think about Trump winning the elections? Do you think it will be harder to work with his team, or maybe like the same, or you don't know yet? What do you think?
So I think I have a very long answer to that question. So I will try and break it up into pieces. So one, I think that it will be harder. There's cause for concern based on statements that Trump has made, and in particular Senator Vance has made on Ukraine. However, it is not a catastrophe by any stretch of the imagination. It is a challenge. And that challenge has a solution, and the solution is civic engagement and advocacy. We have seen that advocacy works. So on April 24th of this year, Congress passed a very significant supplemental appropriations bill that included billions of dollars of aid for Ukraine. Not as many as was advertised, right? So we say it included $60 billion for Ukraine. About half of that was actually for the United States, but a significant portion of it was for Ukraine. And for 6 months, maybe it was even longer, 7, 8 months, the House of Representatives and the Republican leadership of the House was not willing to move on this aid package. And so the pro-Ukrainian advocacy community activated and mobilized. We had members of Congress getting hundreds of phone calls from people all across the country, well, in their districts, but all across the country, people were mobilized to call their members of Congress and to advocate for this piece of legislation. We had people in Speaker Johnson's district engaging with him and his staff directly. We had people in Majority Leader Steve Scalise's district engaging with him in his office directly. And I'm not talking about Razom, I'm talking about every organization in the United States, Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian, that wanted this piece of legislation to pass. And initially, the House of Representatives was unwilling to move on this. But because of the advocacy campaign that the pro-Ukrainian community, I'm not even saying the Ukrainian community, the pro-Ukraine community in the U.S. led, we were able to be successful. And not only, and this is enormous, not only did Speaker Johnson go from voting no, like he previously did when he was just a regular member of the House, to supporting the passage of the package, the Speaker actually pressed the green button himself. So it's rare for the Speaker of the House to actually vote on a package since he presides over the chamber. The Speaker actually stepped down and pressed the green button in order to vote for the package. So we now have a Speaker of the House of Representatives who understands exactly why it's crucial for Ukraine to win. And this is not only an accomplishment of the Ukrainian advocacy community. Speaker Johnson also had access to classified information about exactly what was going on in Ukraine and the importance and effect of U.S. aid to Ukraine. And he personally credits seeing those classified briefings and documents and reports, and then he understood exactly why it's crucial for the U.S. to continue to help Ukraine. And there were a number of individuals here in Ukraine who played an absolutely crucial role in speaking to Speaker Johnson and his staff, other leadership of the House of Representatives on both sides of the aisle. And so I think that it's going to be extremely important for Ukrainian civil society leaders and Ukrainian political leaders to continue to engage in good faith, honestly and openly, with American leadership in the United States.
I hope that it will work.
Yes.
And
we've seen that it can work. We've seen that it can work.
Yes. And I hope that it will work with Trump and
Yes.
his team. I believe in it with my whole heart. And to finish this interview, I wanted to ask, what projects are you the most proud of? Projects of Razom.
That's a good question. That's a good question. So there's a lot. So we have these 5 programs that Razom is working on. I'm particularly proud of these psychological support clinics that we have a network of all across Ukraine. It's a program called Razom z Tobою, and you can learn more about it on the Razom website that we have. And on the advocacy front, one of the things that I'm most proud of in particular is the campaign that we participated in as an organization to pass the supplemental on April 24th. So this was a months-long campaign in which we partnered with organizations from California to New York to Florida to Washington State in order to make sure that the voices of Americans all across the country who were supportive of Ukraine, to make sure that their voices were heard.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also want to say thank you for the work that you're doing in the United States. We all really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your support. And I think that we in the United States are extremely grateful for everything that you and those who are close to you are doing here in Ukraine. So we wanted to express our support and our gratitude to you and to your viewers. It's our responsibility to do whatever we can to support you, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.